Hey everyone! ChatGPT Taylor aka Taylor here. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is something a little bit different, but it's about a topic that I think is worth talking about. In this video, I will go over each instance where a camper threw their vote during an elimination ceremony. Throwing your vote in a show like Disventure Camp can be done for several reasons. Perhaps two of your allies are the two main targets for elimination and you don't want to vote for either of them, so you vote for a third person so that you can preserve your bond with your allies. Perhaps you just want to make someone paranoid, so you cast a vote against them to freak them out. Or maybe you just hate one of the campers so much that you cast a vote against them out of principle, even though you know they probably won't get voted out. Either way, there's usually some sort of motive behind throwing your vote, and this move has been made by several campers throughout the first 3 seasons of Disventure Camp. By my count, there are 8 instances throughout the first 3 seasons where a camper threw their vote, and I will be going over each instance in detail. I will note the camper's motive behind throwing their vote, whether the move impacted their game in a positive or negative way, and also whether or not it was an ideal or logical move to make considering the information that they had at the moment they voted. And with that, let's get started. Before I begin, make sure to like and subscribe if this video is to your liking, and make sure to comment down below if there's anything that you would like to see going forward. The first instance of a camper throwing their vote in Disventure Camp was in episode 2 of season 1, when Ashley threw her vote by voting for Alec. As a refresher, this episode was when Fiore lied to her team by saying that Will yelled at her during the challenge, causing the majority of his teammates to turn against him. Ashley didn't want to vote for Will due to her feelings towards him, but she also didn't want to vote for Fiore since she believed what Fiore said. This prompted Ashley to vote for Alec instead, causing a 4-2-1 vote that sent Will home. I don't think this move impacted Ashley's game too negatively. Alec never brought up the fact that he received a vote during that episode's elimination ceremony, so throwing a vote on Alec didn't make him more against Ashley than he already was. And by not voting for Fiore, she stayed on Fiore's good side for the foreseeable future. The biggest negative that came out of it was that Nick didn't seem too happy with it, but based on one of his confessionals in episode 3, I think that Nick was more upset at Lil for actually voting for Fiore, so I don't think this move ended up horribly for Ashley. I have a hard time saying that this move was ideal, but I do think that it was the best move that Ashley could have realistically made. Now, you might argue that Ashley should have fought to get votes on Fiore since Fiore was actually lying and Will would have stayed loyal to Ashley down the line. However, I don't think that could realistically happen. Fiore was obviously voting for Will, Nick seemed completely convinced by Fiore's claims, and since Ellie and Alec knew that there was a majority alliance that they weren't a part of, and since Alec did seem to view Fiore in a good light by this point, I feel like Alec and Ellie would be set on voting for Will to save Fiore and break up that alliance. So even if Ashley joined Lil and Will in voting for Fiore, the result is still 4-3, and Will still goes home. However, since Ashley definitely had feelings for Will by this point in the show, having Ashley not vote for Will surely helped preserve her bond with him, which eventually allowed the two of them to start dating later that season. So overall, considering that Will was probably getting voted out no matter what, Ashley probably made the best move by throwing her vote. She preserves her bond with Will, Fiore, and her alliance, while also voting for someone who didn't seem to care that he got a vote. So let's call this a good move. 9 out of 10. The next instance that I want to mention is from episode 7 of season 1, when Jake voted for Gabby rather than Dan or Ellie. As a refresher, episode 7 featured Ellie getting swapped to Jake's team, so when Jake's team had to vote someone out, Ellie was the obvious target for being the newest member of the team. However, due to the brief friendship that Jake and Ellie developed during this episode, Jake didn't want to vote for Ellie, and instead voted for Gabby, causing a 3-2-1 vote that sent Dan home. Did this move work out for Jake? Well, this stray vote for Gabby didn't seem to anger Gabby that much considering that she never brought it up, so the argument could be made that this vote didn't hurt Jake's game. Sure, Gabby did try and take Jake out of the episode 8 challenge, but I feel like this was prompted by Jake, Miriam, and Tom targeting Gabby and Ellie during the challenge first, rather than by Jake's thrown vote against Gabby. And since Jake's vote probably doesn't change whether or not Fiore tells Jake, Miriam, and Tom that Gabby and Ellie are plotting against them, I think Gabby turns against Jake anyway. So Jake's thrown vote probably didn't have a major effect on his game. However, I don't think this was an ideal move for him to make. By this point, Gabby had a bit of a reputation for being volatile, and casting a stray vote against someone volatile doesn't sound like a good idea. Sure, this didn't directly cause Gabby to turn against Jake, but I think Jake is lucky that this wasn't the catalyst that turned Gabby against him. This move could have turned out horribly for him if Gabby found out that Jake voted for her. If this happens, then Gret, Fiore, and Alec could easily end up joining Ellie and Gabby in voting for Jake at the next ceremony, sending him home by a vote of 5-3. So I really think that Jake got lucky here. There aren't many worse moves that Jake could have made in this spot, unless he voted for Tom or Miriam. To me, the ideal move would have been to work with Gabby and Ellie to vote for Dan, since that allows him to stay on Ellie's good side without angering Ellie's closest ally who is also volatile. This also gives him a stable alliance since the boys' alliance from episode 3 kind of fell apart and his bond with Tom was very frayed at this point. Sure, you could argue that Jake should have found a way to get Ellie eliminated in episode 7 since Ellie ended up being the one to manipulate him into voting for Tom in episode 10. However, there's no way that Jake could have gotten rid of Ellie in episode 7 considering that Gabby planned on playing her immunity totem on her. So all in all, I think Jake made too risky of a move for my liking, especially when he had a more ideal move available for him to make. Not good. 4 out of 10. Sorry Jake. But we're not done with Jake. The next instance that I want to mention is from episode 9 of season 1, when Jake casted his vote for Alec. To be honest, I don't know if this qualifies as a thrown vote, but I have a really hard time understanding this move, and the lack of a clear reason why this move happened is why I included it in this video. As a refresher, episode 9 of season 1 had the campers compete in a virtual reality challenge, where Fiore ended up winning immunity by being the last one alive in a zombie apocalypse. With Fiore immune and the Villains Alliance exposed, Fiore and Alec turned against Gret, their own Villains Alliance ally, resulting in a 5-2 vote that sent Gret packing. Jake joined Gret in voting against Alec, but I genuinely can't figure out why he made this move. Considering that all of his allies at this point voted against Gret, I don't see why he wouldn't have joined them. Him and Alec barely talked by this point in the season, and considering Gret's general demeanor while she was on Jake's team, I don't think he would have the highest opinion of Gret. So whether you look at it from a strategy viewpoint or an emotional viewpoint, there aren't any clear reasons to me as to why Jake would vote for Alec over Gret. And since Tom and Ellie agreed before the ceremony to vote for Gret, I don't see why they wouldn't tell Jake about it either. That being said, if we're counting it as a thrown vote for its peculiarity, I don't think this was a horrible move for his game. Maybe not ideal, but not horrible either. I don't think it makes too much of a difference if Jake votes for Gret over Alec. In theory, Jake voting for Gret is probably the safer option since she's going home regardless, but since Alec never brought up the fact that he got 2 votes at that episode's ceremony instead of just 1, I don't think he was too hurt by it. I'm pretty sure Alec still would have gone through with his plan to manipulate Jake at the final 6 even if Jake didn't vote for him at the final 7, so Jake's game probably doesn't change regardless of who he votes for. So, since the reasoning behind it is unclear, it has a negligible effect on Jake's game, and it's not the ideal move for him to make in this situation, I'm going to say it was an alright move. 5 out of 10. To kick off the thrown votes from season 2, we have Aiden throwing his vote by voting for James in episode 4. As a refresher, episode 4 of season 2 was when Yul and Rosa switched teams thanks to Ria's advantage. And once the orange team lost the challenge, Yul found himself in a dangerous position. However, once him and James had a brief conversation, they concocted a plan where Yul would convince Aiden to throw his vote on James, while James and Yul would force a tie against Maggie, which allowed Yul to survive by winning the subsequent tiebreaker, eliminating Maggie in the process. Aiden made it clear in the confessional that he still expected Yul to get voted out, and that he just wanted to see James freak out when there were 2 votes cast against him. Of course, Aiden was clearly manipulated into thinking that Yul was on his side, resulting in him being blindsided by Maggie's elimination. However, even though Aiden was clearly manipulated, throwing his vote on James actually didn't hurt his game that much. Considering that James poisoned Yul to protect Aiden in the following episode, and then went on to have a relationship with Aiden after the show, James clearly wasn't hurt by Aiden's stray vote against him. And oddly enough, when looking at this from a results-oriented basis, throwing his vote actually helped his game. If you've watched some of my videos, you might remember a video where I talked about what would have happened if Yul was eliminated in episode 4 of season 2 instead of Maggie. In this universe, James is the last pre-merge boot, and Aiden ends up getting 7th place. So in this instance, throwing his vote and allowing Yul to win the tiebreaker actually earned Aiden a better placement than he would have gotten if he voted for Yul outright. So results-wise, this move actually helped his game. However, when looking at this from a logic standpoint, this was not a good move for Aiden. By throwing his vote, Aiden risks making James upset with him. Sure, James wasn't upset at Aiden when he voted for him the first time, but from Aiden's perspective, Aiden expected James to freak out after realizing that he got 2 votes. With this expectation, Aiden is taking a risk by intentionally burning one of his teammates, potentially severing his bond with James. Sure, Aiden didn't seem to want James as his ally by this point, but considering that his team was going to be down in numbers 5-4 against the green team, Aiden can't afford to make people mad at him. And also, by not voting with Maggie and Lake, Aiden potentially risks having Maggie and Lake view him as being unreliable and easily manipulated. With this thought potentially in their minds, James could have used this as a way to turn them against Aiden in episode 5 if he wanted to, because who would want an ally who is unreliable and easily manipulated? I mean, come on, having an ally that is unreliable and easily manipulated is like carrying around dead weight. It just doesn't make sense. And I can't imagine anyone putting up with someone who is unreliable and easily manipulated. Seriously. But in the end, Aiden's luck worked in his favor, and none of the risks he took ended up hurting him. This is another one of those unique scenarios where a camper makes an objectively poor decision, and it actually ends up helping their game. If you ask me, this move worked out well, but I don't think that's because of Aiden's gameplay, so I don't feel good about ranking it highly at all. 2 out of 10. This move ended well for Aiden, but it shouldn't have. The next thrown vote actually comes from James in episode 7 of season 2. As a refresher, this was the episode where everyone outside of the poly trio agreed to work together and target one person in the poly trio. While Lake, Rosa, Aiden, and Rhea agreed to vote for Tess, James instead voted for Ali, causing a 4-3-1 vote that resulted in Tess's elimination. Much like Jake's vote for Alec in episode 9 of season 1, I still don't get the reasoning behind James's decision to throw his vote. Neither him nor Ali bring up this stray vote at any point past this episode. And I actually brought up this point in a previous video if you want to check it out. But to me, this stray vote just seems to be made in an attempt to make the elimination ceremony more suspenseful, even if it doesn't make sense. Did this move help or hurt James's game? To be honest, I genuinely don't think it affected his game at all. Like I mentioned earlier, neither he nor Ali bring up this vote at any point past this episode, so it's as if it never happened. Ali doesn't seem to be bothered by the fact that she received a vote, and considering that James ended up winning the season, I can't say that throwing his vote hurt his game. Is that because the move wasn't important? Not really. I would also chalk this one up to luck, because if the current Ali received a stray vote, considering her paranoia regarding how people perceive her, she would be freaking out a lot more than past Ali. Now, was throwing his vote ideal? I don't think it was. To me, the ideal move would have been to join his allies by voting for Tess. In doing so, you show your allies that you are with them, and you create the same enemies that they do. Voting for Ali risks making an enemy out of someone who you know will still be in the competition tomorrow, creating the possibility of them plotting to take you out next time. Sure, Ali never really did that, but I still feel like it was an unnecessary risk that could have backfired had Ali been replaced by a different camper, like Yul or Gret. Therefore, I'm only going to give this move a 4 out of 10. Not horrible, but it was an unnecessary risk that could have been avoided with an ideal move. Sorry, James. Going back to someone who already appeared on this list, we have Aiden casting another stray vote, this time voting for Rhea in episode 8 of season 2. To put this into context, Carol returned to the game with immunity, and also gave immunity to Ali and Hunter, forcing the main alliance of 5 to turn against each other. While James, Ali, Hunter, and Carol targeted Lake, and Rosa, Rhea, and Lake targeted James, Aiden decided to throw his vote, not wanting to vote against James or Lake, since they were his two closest allies by that point. This resulted in a 4-3-1 vote that sent Lake home. Was this move bad for Aiden's game? Well, I'm inclined to think not. Considering that Aiden was going to lose one of his closest allies regardless of what he did, if Aiden settled on the fact that Lake was going to get voted out, throwing his vote was a good way to preserve his bond with both of them. And even though Rhea eventually hated Aiden down the road, I think that hatred had more to do with Aiden sabotaging Carol in episode 9, rather than Aiden voting for Rhea back in episode 8. Also, I'm not convinced that saving Lake would be a better option. Earlier on in my channel's history, I played out a scenario where Lake survived the episode 8 elimination ceremony and James was voted out instead. In this scenario, Aiden ends up being eliminated in 6th after Rhea flips to take out Lake in 7th. So Aiden doesn't get any further with James gone than he did in canon with Lake gone. So if Aiden voted for James to force a 4-4 tie and Lake won the tiebreaker, Lake and Aiden probably still get voted out one after another. And even if Rosa saves Aiden with her totem at the final 6 and Hunter is eliminated instead, Aiden probably doesn't get further than 5th place. If Aiden loses the final 5 immunity challenge, which I think he does considering he's against Carol and Ali in this scenario, then Aiden probably gets voted out 3-2 by Carol, Rhea, and Ali. So results-wise, this move gave Aiden the best possible scenario for him to make it far. Now logic-wise, was this the ideal move for Aiden to make? Honestly, this was probably one of the better moves that Aiden could have made in this position. If Aiden voted for Lake, he risks losing a genuine friend. If he votes for James, regardless of whether or not he stays, Aiden's bond with James will be broken. And even though he risks losing Rhea's trust with this vote, Rhea was probably the person in his alliance who he trusted the least, so if he was going to throw his vote, I think he chose the best possible target. Sure, it's not ideal to lose one of your top 2 allies, but since one of them was guaranteed to get voted out anyways, I think Aiden made the best move he could have made under the circumstances. Good job, Aiden. 9 out of 10. Impressive. Moving on to season 3, we have Tess throwing her vote in episode 3. As a refresher, episode 3 was when Ellie framed Lake for making an all-girl alliance, causing Tom to join her and Gabby in voting for Lake, while Aiden joined Lake in voting for Ellie. This left Tess as the swing vote, and rather than choosing a side, she threw her vote against Tom, causing a 3-2-1 vote that sent Lake home. Tess later admitted that she couldn't choose between her 2 allies, and that she was worried that if she voted for Ellie and Ellie won the subsequent tiebreaker, she would be toast. Was this a good move for Tess' game? I'm under the current belief that it was not a horrible move. First of all, even though Tess voted for Tom didn't seem to be too upset afterwards, and I don't think he ever brought it up later in the season, so Tess didn't suffer any consequences on that front. On the flip side, since Tess didn't directly vote against Ellie still considered Tess to be an ally, albeit with a little suspicion. But if they had made it to the merge, and if Ellie is still on her side, then Gabby probably stays with her as well, which is good for Tess's game. Now, you might be thinking, does Tess make it further in the game if she doesn't vote for Tom? I actually don't think she does. If Tess votes for Lake instead, it doesn't change Ellie's behavior in the subsequent episodes, so I think Tess still flips on Ellie in episode 8, and then Tess is still voted out in episode 9. If Tess votes for Ellie to force a 3-3 tie and Ellie wins the tiebreaker, I still think Ellie's behavior remains very similar to how it was in canon, although with a little extra resentment towards Tess. This resentment probably reinforces Tess's decision to flip in episode 8, and Tess is still voted out in episode 9. And if Tess forces a 3-3 tie and Lake wins the tiebreaker instead, I actually think that this could end up worse than in canon. If Ellie is gone, then there's no one to push Tom onto Jake during episode 7's challenge, meaning that Jake probably doesn't get distracted, meaning that he won't lose another point for the magenta team. This would have tied the magenta team with the blue team, and if the blue team loses the tiebreaker, they probably vote out Gabby 4-1. And if they lose the space challenge like they did in canon, there's a chance that Tess could get voted out if Aiden tells Lake that he won't vote for Tom. If Lake reluctantly joins Aiden and Tom, Tess gets voted out 3-1. And if Lake forces a tie against Tom, then Tom probably wins the tiebreaker considering his superior strength in challenges. Therefore, I'm inclined to think that at best, Tess throwing her vote actually helped her survive longer, and at worst, it didn't affect her game. But all in all, given the information that Tess had available to her, did she make the ideal move? Truthfully, I don't think it was the worst move, and I also don't think it was the best move. If we're looking at Tess's options as specifically what she does with her vote, then this wasn't horrible. I'm assuming that Tess isn't allowed to vote for herself, since there hasn't been any precedent set as to whether or not it's allowed, so I'll assume it's not since that seems like a reasonable rule to put in place. As I said earlier, if Tess votes for Ellie, it severs their bond, and it's almost guaranteed to make the subsequent episodes uncomfortable for Tess, even if Ellie loses the tiebreaker. Gabby also turns against Tess in this situation, which isn't ideal either. Voting for Gabby probably has a similar effect, and it might be an even worse option considering that Gabby is known to hold grudges. To me, voting for Lake is the best option since Tess clearly picks a side, but it leaves the door open for Aiden and Tom to view her in a good light and campaign for her to flip later on. The next best option is probably voting for Aiden, since this probably still solidifies Ellie's loyalty to Tess since Ellie wanted Aiden out originally. Although, there's still the risk that Aiden holds a grudge against Tess for this. The third best option is what she does in canon, since that also risks Tom holding a grudge against her without the benefit of voting for someone that Ellie wanted out at that ceremony. Therefore, I'm going to give this move a 6.5 out of 10. Oddly enough, it's one of the better thrown votes seen on this show. The eighth and final instance of a camper throwing their vote so far is Rhea voting for Yul in episode 4 of season 3. As a refresher, this was the episode where Miriam exposed the villains' alliance to Connor and then tried to turn the team against Alec, the de facto leader of the villains' alliance. While Miriam voted for Alec and the majority of the team voted for Miriam, Rhea threw her vote against Yul, hoping that Yul would think that Connor voted for him and direct his aggressions towards Connor instead of herself. Results-wise, this move was actually pretty good for Rhea. The following episodes showed that Yul did believe that Connor was the one that voted for him, leading to Yul voting Connor out in episode 6. If Rhea doesn't frame Connor for this move, does Yul take out Rhea before Connor? I think it's up for debate. So Rhea taking the extra step to keep Yul's anger towards Connor was a good idea. However, this move didn't completely eliminate Yul's anger towards Rhea, considering that Yul still voiced his disdain towards Rhea in episode 6 for losing the challenge and dropping a light on his foot. So even though the move worked out in Rhea's favor, it didn't completely transform her situation. Logic-wise, was this move ideal for Rhea to make? I think the idea is good, but it's probably the riskiest move on this list. Rhea took so many risks by voting for Yul. For one, if Connor had voted for Yul instead of Miriam, then Yul would know that both Connor and Rhea voted for him, which might cause Yul to target Rhea even more than before. Additionally, if Gret and Yul flip to join Miriam in voting for Alec like they discussed in the episode, and Connor and Alec keep their votes on Miriam like they did in canon, then Rhea's thrown vote would have caused a 3-2-1 plurality that sends Alec home, and that's horrible for Rhea's game since almost everyone on her team would have a reason to be against her by that point. And finally, even if all the votes fall exactly the way that Rhea expects them to, there's nothing stopping Yul from suspecting Rhea of voting for him anyways. After all, I'm pretty sure Yul had more serious arguments with Rhea than with Connor in season 3. So in my eyes, it was an extremely high-risk move, which makes me want to say that it wasn't ideal. Personally, I think the best option is to just vote for Miriam and then work on rebuilding a bond with Yul, rather than voting for him and hoping he suspects Connor of doing it. It's less risky and the benefit is potentially higher if Rhea is able to soften Yule's aggressions towards her. So overall, this is an overly risky move that didn't fully benefit Rhea's game, so I have to give it a low score. Honestly, 1.5 out of 10. This could have ended horribly for Rhea, and she's lucky that it didn't. So overall, throwing your vote in Disventure Camp is quite a mixed bag. You could be like Ashley and make a good decision by throwing it. You could be like Rhea and make a bad decision by doing it. Or you could be like Aiden and make a bad decision one day and a good decision on another day. If anything, this shows us that throwing your vote will always carry some form of risk, and you have to make sure that the potential benefits outweigh the risks, or else you could find yourself on the wrong side of a vote that you could have prevented. And that about does it for this video. What do you think of my thoughts? Do you agree with my thoughts? Do you disagree? Did I miss something big that would impact the entire video? Either way, please let me know your thoughts in the comments section below. Thank you very much for watching. Click like if you like the video, click subscribe if you really like the video, and for some ending words of wisdom. Look carefully whenever you sign a contract, because before you know it, you might end up having to do TikTok dances in front of millions of viewers. Thank you, and farewell.